Kneeling on the ground before their god king Yhwach, every Sternritter partakes in a ritual of communion wherein they are granted a Schrift. By drinking Yhwach's own blood, a letter is carved directly into that Sternritter's soul, from which they are bestowed a unique set of powers and abilities. This all stems from Yhwach's own unique ability to see words on people as if they were engraved into their very bodies. These words generally encapsulate something about that individual, something they are missing, a void in their heart, and Yhwach shares with them a portion of his own soul to unlock that missing element, to grant them powers and abilities based around that single word, that individual's Schrift. Now, there are loads of Sternritter in the series, and therefore, by extension, loads of Schrifts as well. And in this video, we're going to try and tackle each and every one of them. I'm going to be looking at every single Schrift within the 1000-year Blood War arc, going through each of them and trying to explain and break them down as best I can. So, of course, on that note, there will be spoilers for the entirety of the 1000-year Blood War arc in this video. And one last piece of housekeeping, we won't be looking at Yhwach's the Almighty in this video for a couple of reasons. Firstly, this one is about the Sternritter, and he isn't one. And secondly, and more crucially, I've already done an entire video looking at the Almighty itself, so make sure to check that out as well. And one last thing, if you're looking for a more spoiler-free introduction to the Sternritter, I recommend checking out my earlier video, Who Are the Sternritter, which basically goes into Bleach's newest enemy faction in as spoiler-free a way as possible. So, to kickstart our deep dive look at every Schrift within the series of Bleach, we have Uryu Ishida's the Antithesis, known as the perfect anti-setup in Japanese. Uryu's the Antithesis is a pretty simple Schrift to get us started, but also easily one of the most powerful in the entire series. To put it very simply, the Antithesis allows Uryu to choose two targets, himself included should he wish, and reverse anything and everything that has happened between them. The best example of this we get is also the only real example we get when Uryu uses the Antithesis in his battle against Hashwolf. Hashwolf has grievously injured Uryu up until this point, to the point where Uryu is nearly beaten, but the moment he activates the Antithesis, he reverses everything that has happened in that battle so far between himself and his other chosen target, Hashwolf. So suddenly Hashwolf is the recipient of enormous wounds and injuries, while Uryu is completely cleansed of everything he has received in that battle so far. And that's simply it. The Antithesis is a complete reversal of everything that has occurred between two targets, and it is pretty broken, to say the least, and Hashwolf even speculates that it might be the only ability capable of countering Yhwach's the Almighty. Speaking of Yugram Hashwolf, up next is his own Schrift, Be the Balance, or also known as World Harmony in Japanese. Now, you'll see within this list that a lot of the Schrifts do feel like your typical kind of abilities in Bleach, but others are extremely vague and often quite conceptual, and the Balance is absolutely one of those, and I'll try my best to break it down. To put it bluntly, Hashwolf's Schrift, the Balance, allows him to balance the scales of any conflict within his vicinity. Hashwolf's Schrift takes misfortune from those that it has befallen and redistributes it to people who are currently experiencing good fortune. If we look at one of the most prominent examples of Hashwolf utilizing the Balance in the series, we can look at the scene where he kills his fellow Sternritter Kang-Do. Kang has just experienced a bout of good fortune. He was able to survive his battle with Hitsugaya by activating Volstendig and successfully made it back to base. That counts as good fortune on Kang's part. In order to balance this good fortune, Hashwolf tries to attack Kang, but Kang successfully blocks his blade using the iron, another show of good fortune. But not only is this good fortune for Kang, it's also misfortune for Hashwolf because he failed to kill his intended target. Taking the misfortune that he himself has just suffered, as well as counterbalancing all of this good fortune that Kang has had up until now, Hashwolf's Schrift enables him to become powerful enough to cleave right through his target. Essentially, should a person experience significant good fortune in a battle setting, Hashwolf can instead convert that into misfortune to then redistribute to them, and it's amplified by the amount of good fortune the target has otherwise experienced. Later on, we get an extension to the Balance when Hashwolf reveals a new item of his known as the Frun Shield. Any misfortune that would befall Hashwolf himself directly is instead absorbed by his front shield to be stored and used at a later time when Hashwolf sees fit. For instance, if we go back to that example we used during the Antithesis segment when Uryu successfully pulls that move off and injures Hashwolf, that is good fortune on Uryu's part and misfortune on Hashwolf's part. However, that first element of misfortune is Hashwolf being affected by the Antithesis. He then suffers another bout of misfortune on top of that when he is actually injured in the process of that. So when he reflects this back on Uryu using the balance, Uryu is initially injured by that first bout of misfortune, but then the next bout that affected Hashwolf directly when he was physically wounded by Uryu's Antithesis was collected by his front shield, and Hashwolf later rains that down on Uryu as well. I did say it was pretty conceptual and pretty weird. As far as I'm concerned, the balance is easily one of the strangest abilities Bleach has ever seen, and I hope I was able to break it down sufficiently. Known as Compulsory Execution in Japanese, Pernida Pankajaz's Schrift C, the Compulsory, is one of the more terrifying and, in my opinion, well-written Schrifts in the series. Pernida's Schrift allows it to fire nerves from its fingertips and then use those nerves to control the bodies of others, even being able to go so far as to nearly instantly reduce an opponent's body to a puddle of blood. Pernida's nerves can even control inorganic material, as we see the Compulsory affecting even a massive stone wall, seemingly bringing it to life. What makes this Schrift truly scary, however, is this idea of being compelled to do something extends not only to Pernida itself, but any parts of Pernida that would be removed. So for instance, Pernida continues to evolve in the midst of battle, and any parts of itself that are severed or removed in any other way can then continue to use the Compulsory, can continue to fire nerves of their own, and evolve on their own accord as well. To put it simply, any of the newly formed versions of Pernida are free to use the Compulsory as they see fit, in conjunction with the original body. They can even go so far as to attach nerves to the arrows that they fire from their bows, as well as creating a web of nerves on the ground to lay out as a trap. Interestingly though, the Compulsory is not really a Schrift. Pernida already had this ability before meeting Yhwach. Yhwach simply named it. My personal favourite Sternritter, Askin Naklavar's Schrift, is D, the Death Dealing, also known in Japan simply as Lethal Dose. Now, the lethal dose of something is the amount required to cause guaranteed death, and Askin has total and complete control over such dosages. By ingesting a substance into his body, whether it's simply through drinking it or from suffering a massive attack, Askin can raise or lower the lethal dosage of that substance to his liking, both for himself and for anyone in his vicinity. For example, when he drinks his own blood, he's able to lower the amount of blood needed in his opponent's body for it to be fatal. Similarly, when hit by an enormous explosive attack from Yushiro Shihoin, Askin survives the attack and is able to change the lethal dosage of Yushiro's Reiatsu, raising it for himself massively and effectively making himself immune to any future attacks from Yushiro himself. What this boils down to is, with the death dealing, Askin is able to become immune to any attack that doesn't kill him outright. And not only this, but taking it a step further, by raising the lethal dosage of a substance he has ingested to the point where he basically becomes immune, his body will begin healing itself as though it were never affected in the first place. Askin is capable of using the death dealing in numerous different forms, such as the gift ball and the gift bad, wherein he combines substances and then poisons his enemy with them, and in his Volstendig, his death dealing will automatically adapt to any change in any substance. Known in Japan as Bombing Raid, Bambietta Bastabine's Schrift E, the Explode, is another one that's fairly simple, but also kind of devious with a nice twist. Bambietta has the power to create bombs, only she's not throwing bombs, she's actually throwing pockets of reishi which she can then detonate. Because she's simply throwing reishi, this means her attack is effectively unblockable. In her holy form, Bambietta can throw reishi in all directions at a near constant and continuous rate, meaning she can detonate virtually everything within her surroundings. But not only can she use this power at range, can she launch this reishi, she can actually detonate explosive energy around herself as well. One of the earliest Schrifts we're introduced to in the series is As Not Schrift F, the Fear. Asnod's thorn projectiles have the ability to induce fear into anyone they strike. A single strike is enough to engulf Az's target in complete and total fear, both of Az himself but also of the irrational, of deep-seated primal fear. Those affected experience inescapable instinctual fear and witness visions of their greatest fears brought to life. For the average Shinigami, simply witnessing these fears come to life and experiencing this fear is enough to cause their hearts to burst, but more experienced, more battle-hardened Shinigami are able to withstand it for longer periods of time, although Asnod is fairly certain that all opponents will succumb eventually. When utilising the fear, a black substance is released from Az's thorns which can travel through some objects to chase its target. In his Volstendig, this Schrift is taken to the next level, as an opponent need only gaze upon Az's monstrous form and fall prey to this unavoidable fear. They'll find themselves frozen to the spot, and if left unchecked, the fear the enemy can feel is limitless, and closing their eyes to escape it will do nothing but exacerbate it within the darkness. Lil Toto Lamperd's Schrift G, the Glutton, is another one that's actually pretty simple, but easily one of the more weird and disturbing Schrifts of them all that really utilises some body horror elements. Known simply as gluttonous in Japanese, Lil Toto's mouth can warp and transform into an enormous, flexible set of jagged teeth that will eat anything and anyone around her. The light novel Can't Fear Your Own World actually expands on this Schrift a little bit, claiming that the Glutton gives Lil Toto the powers of anyone she eats. One of the more prominent Sternritter in the arc, Bazby, has the Schrift H, the Heat, known as Scorching Heat in Japanese. This allows Bazby to utilise the reishi around him to create and control flames, as well as control the heat of his own body. Bazby can heat himself up to such a degree that he will instantly melt the massive ice blade that Hitsugaya used to stab him to the wall, as well as simply placing his hand on the remainder of the ice causes it to be destroyed as well. Bazby has total control over his own fire, able to wield a wave of flame or even condense it down to several different abilities. Burner Finger 1 massively condenses Bazby's flame into effectively a gunshot, while Burner Finger 2 is an enormous flaming slashing attack. Burner Finger 3 melts nearby surfaces and turns them into gushing torrents of lava, while Burner Finger 4 condenses the flame around Bazby's hand as a massive broadsword, which causes enormous explosions and is capable of cutting through buildings. And finally, Bazby's ultimate attack, Burning Full Fingers, creates an enormous spiralling torrent of flame in front of him. Another fairly simple Schrift is Kangdo's Eye, the Iron, known as Steel in Japanese. This Schrift allows Kang to coat himself in an outer layer of iron, capable of deflecting even Hashwalth's blade at very close range. Fitting for his domineering personality, Kirige OP's Schrift J, the Jail, fires an arrow that allows him to forcibly entrap his opponents within a prison. This cage of reishi that Kirige traps his enemies in is completely all-encompassing. They are effectively totally shut off from the outside world. The reiatsu of the victim encased within the jail cannot be felt, and their voice cannot be heard by those outside of it. The cage itself is strong enough to even withstand a point-blank range Getsuga Tensho from Ichigo while in Bankai. Not only that, but the arrows fired while Kirige is utilising the jail can actually be used to seal doorways shut. Unfortunately, the next Sternritter, BG9, is one of the only ones whose Schrift we still don't know, and we can only speculate as to what the K actually means. My major theory for BG9 was always that he was going to be something along the lines of K, the Knowledge, as we see him continuously gathering data during his battle with Soifon and using it to great effect against her. For instance, when he's hit by Mukyu Shunko, he seems to be able to devise a perfect counter to it, stabbing Soifon through the wrist and cutting off her Reiatsu supply so she can no longer use Shunko in their battle. But of course, that is only speculation for the time being. One of the more disturbing Sternritter is Pepe Wakabrada with his Schrift L, the Love. When Pepe strikes somebody with his heart-shaped projectile, that person immediately becomes infatuated with him. Pepe's victims fall so deeply in love with him that they would do things they wouldn't otherwise do, such as attacking their friends and allies, as well as people who they know to be considerably stronger than them. Pepe's Schrift enables him to control anything with a heart, and that includes Zanpakuto as well, as Byakuya's own Senbon Zakura quite literally turns against him as we see the blade attempt to stab Byakuya in the face. Pepe's victims will continue to fight beyond their normal means. Even if they are seriously wounded, they will continue to get up and fight for their love. However, Pepe's love can be countered by beings that simply don't know the meaning of the word. One of the strongest, most all-powerful Schrifts in the entire series belongs to Gerard Valkyrie, Sternritter M, the Miracle. The Miracle is quite a detailed Schrift, but to really boil it down, it essentially manifests miracles upon Gerard himself, allowing him to perform the impossible. By giving form to the thoughts and feelings of the masses around him, Gerard is able to complete tasks that would normally be either completely impossible or at the very least extremely difficult for him to normally succeed at. For example, when Gerard takes on almost the entirety of the Gotei 13 himself, that would normally be an unwinnable situation for him. Defeating them would be a task that would be virtually impossible and would require a miracle, which is exactly why his body transforms in the way it does to allow him to do so. Similarly, when a now gigantic Gerard attempts to find the Vizards, he comments that doing so would be virtually impossible, as he basically can't feel their Reiatsu at all, for it's so tiny. But of course, the moment he says that, he's able to locate them thanks to his Schrift. Gerard's very Schrift defies reason itself. When those around him fear that they might not be able to defeat him, Gerard takes and manifests those very fears in the form of his God-size ability. Gerard is able to convert any damage inflicted upon him, even fatal injury, into making himself stronger and larger than before. These changes to Gerard's overall size and strength are relative to the wounds he has sustained. For example, when Byakuya kills Gerard by forcing Senbon Zakura through his head, his body turns gigantic in response. When Zaraki arrives and slices off one of Gerard's arms with ease, a brand new, bigger and stronger arm arrives in its place, complete with little shields on the knuckles. And of course, when Gerard is sliced completely in half, his body stitches itself back together and re-emerges massive and stronger than ever before. Much in the way Gerard can manifest the fears of his enemies, he can also manifest the hopes of his allies that his strength will help them win the day. And this hope is manifested in the form of his blade, Hoffnung. When the blade of Hoffnung is damaged by an enemy attack, that damage is instantly reflected back onto the opponent. Much like Pernida's Compulsory, the Miracle is not truly a Schrift, but a power Gerard already possessed and again was simply only named by Yhwach. And unfortunately, again, Robert Akutrone, the next Sternritter, has a Schrift that we don't yet know. Sternritter N remains a total mystery to us, although I have a personal theory of my own that Robert's Schrift was the Navigate. Based on the few panels we actually get to see of him in the series itself, in my opinion, his Schrift would allow him to identify and immediately exploit his opponent's blind spots. We see this when he appears behind Kyoraku, able to score a pretty devastating hit, and later he teleports seemingly immediately right next to Ichigo, able to place the barrel of his gun to the side of Ichigo's head. Of course, again, it's only speculation on my part, but I actually do quite like this theory. We've got another pretty simple Schrift on our hands with Driscoll Bursey's O, the Overkill, known as Massacre in Japanese. This one does pretty much what it says on the tin. Driscoll grows stronger and stronger with everything he kills, whether it's an enemy or even an ally or even a random beast. No matter what it is, if Driscoll kills it, he will grow in strength. The dainty-looking Meninas McCallon's Schrift is P, the Power, and it simply gives her superhuman strength. With one arm, she's capable of lifting an entire building block above her head and bringing it crashing down, as well as punching someone like Zaraki Kenpachi, sending him absolutely flying. Meninas is able to perform these feats almost effortlessly, also grabbing someone like Ichigo by the head and forcing him through a number of buildings without so much as breaking a sweat. To seemingly illustrate her own power even better, Meninas is able to increase the size of her own muscles massively, truly taking on her Schrift's namesake. Known as Objection in Japanese, Berenice Gabrielli's Schrift Q the Question is another strange one in that we didn't really get to see it in action at all. But apparently by speaking to her opponent, Berenice is able to make them question everything everything about themselves and their abilities, but of course, as we know, this power is useless if the opponent can't hear you. Jerome Guisbat is another Sternritter with a fairly simple Schrift in R the Raw, known as Yell in Japanese. With his Schrift, Jerome can transform himself into a colossal ape-like beast and unleash an incredible roar with such sonic power that it generates shockwaves capable of destroying the heads of Shinigami in the nearby vicinity. At the same time, it can also render powers like the Question completely useless, which makes you wonder why those two were sent to the same division. Mask Demasculine's Schrift S, the superstar known simply as Hero in Japanese, is I think a really interesting one and a nice subversion on the usual trope of being supported by your friends. Mask's Schrift grants him additional power when he is being cheered on from the sidelines by a fan. The cheers of said fan allow Mask to gain increased strength, stamina, and even recover from serious injury. In fact, cheers can even go so far as to totally heal Mask, such as when his destroyed eardrums are returned to normal. After reaching a threshold of support from his fan, Mask can even power up to a new, more bulky form. Interestingly, the Schrift, the superstar, is intrinsically linked to his fan known as James. James was in fact revealed to be the true Sternritter by Kubo himself, while Mask is simply a heroic projection of James himself. Because of this, Mask Demasculine's existence is linked to James, and so long as Mask lives, James will return indefinitely. However, if James is killed while he is dead before he has returned to life, Mask can be killed permanently. The Schrift T, the Thunderbolt, is wielded by the Sternritter Candice Catnip. Candice has complete control over lightning bolts. She can generate them in her hand and throw them at her opponents, as well as summon them down from the sky itself. These lightning strikes from the clouds above are actually quite potent, and if Candice herself finds herself in danger, she's able to quickly transform into a bolt of lightning itself and phase out of the way to avoid an enemy's attack. Candice gains an extension of her Schrift in her Volstendig, where she's able to snap off her own wings in the shape of lightning bolts and use them as blades and projectiles. Here's another weird one. Nananajaku's Schrift U, the Underbelly, or known as Defenseless in Japanese, is definitely one of the more out there Schrifts in the series. To enact his Schrift's ability, Nanana must first observe his opponent for a certain amount of time. The more time he spends successfully observing his enemy, the more potent the Underbelly's effects will be. Once Nanana has succeeded in observing them for as long as he feels necessary, he launches a Reishi U at his opponent, which latches onto them and then begins covering them in a grid known as his morphine pattern. This grid pattern, as it covers the opponent, allows Nanana to identify and exploit potential holes within their Reiatsu. By jabbing at and blasting at these holes in their Reiatsu, Nanana is able to force them even wider open, doing more damage still. Using the Underbelly successfully, was able to even render Aizen unconscious for a brief amount of time. Some of the Schrifts are just plain broken, and that's absolutely true for the next one. Known simply as Dreamer in Japanese, Gremithamos V the Visionary allows him to turn fantasy into reality. By simply imagining something, Gremmy is able to make it so, and we get numerous examples of this. We see that he's able to accomplish virtually anything, whether that's healing his own wounds to imagining life itself into existence. Gremmy can summon real-world artillery to his side, or even bring lava or water to the battlefield, as well as the vacuum of space. By cloning himself with his own power, Gremmy is able to increase the strength of his imagination, widening the scope and scale of what is possible for him to achieve. As we see, he even summons an enormous meteorite that threatens to destroy the entire Seirete. This power does come with some interesting weaknesses, however. If Gremmy's attention on a subject is broken, that subject will revert back to the way it was before he imagined anything into being. Not only that, but if forced into a situation, Gremmy could potentially imagine his own death. And finally, when he dies, everything imagined by Gremmy's Schrift dies along with him. Now, we mentioned earlier that Gremmy can create life, and he's able to do so to such a degree that life itself will even have its own sentience, and these next two characters, while not really Sternritter in the traditional sense, also have Schrifts in quotation marks, and powers of their own. So up next we have Gwenael Lee, otherwise known as the Vanishing Point. Gwenael's power enables him to become totally imperceptible. Gwenael is able to vanish from both physical and mental perception to the point where his opponent forgets they even attacked him, or even forgets he existed entirely. Gwenael's power is split into 3 distinct versions which he can swap between freely. Version 1 of Gwenael's power is the vanishing of his appearance at a surface level, effectively rendering him invisible. Version 2 causes Gwenael's existence to vanish as well, effectively rendering him intangible. And finally, version 3 of the Vanishing Point allows Gwenael to vanish his existence from his opponent's minds as well, effectively meaning they completely forget he was ever there. Another of Gremmy's creations is even slightly weirder, being Shaz Domino, who wields the Schrift the Sigma. Now, details of Shaz's power are only found in the supplementary material 13 Blades, but it's still interesting to talk about. Shaz escapes Gremmy's control by using his power the Viability, which allowed him to replace parts of his body over time as they were damaged. Upon his ascension to the Sternritter, Yhwach distinguished him from Grammy by renaming the Viability to the Sigma instead, known as Holy Scar in Japanese. Simply put, by absorbing reishi from his surroundings, Shaz is able to repair and replace his body parts over time. However, this happens automatically, and he has no real control over it. The Sternritter Nyanzol Wyzol wields the Schrift W the Wind, known as Twists and Turns in Japanese, which is extremely apt. Using his Schrift, Nyanzol can bend attacks away from any target of his choosing. Rather than simply countering these attacks, they are instead forcibly bent away from their target, meaning that they essentially can never land a hit and they will always miss. If a sword is looking like it's going to actually connect with Nyanzol himself, it will be forcibly bent backwards upon itself. Nyanzol can even use his Schrift on powerful elements like water, keeping him safe from torrential attacks, as well as even using the Wind to instinctively protect himself from attacks he can't see coming. Taking the Wind to its extreme, Nyanzol can even point a finger at something and it will be repelled from him. We see this as he points his finger towards an enemy's blade and we watch it warp of its own accord before he even points his finger at the opponent itself, causing their body to twist and eventually split in two. The first Quincy to ever be given a Schrift by Yhwach, Lil Barrow, wields the X-axis. Japanese for piercing everything, X the X-axis allows Lil to destroy everything on the X-axis. Anything within Lil's line of sight is destroyed completely with perfect accuracy and cannot be blocked. The reason for this is because there's no bullet. The X-axis simply destroys everything in that line of sight without having to use a projectile of any kind. If Lil is backed into a corner 3 times during a battle, he is able to open his second eye and activate the true power of his Schrift. Much in the way his attacks are totally unblockable and cannot be countered and can pass through everything, at this point, so too can his body, making him totally intangible to enemy attacks. When in his holy form, Lil is in a constant state of intangibility, making it nearly impossible to wound him at all, and he's able to fire multiple shots at once with enough power to devastate enormous chunks of a city. However, there is a critical weakness to the X-axis. If Lil's Heilig Schlein is destroyed in battle, he loses his divine powers and can no longer phase through enemy attacks. We're getting close to the end now with Lloyd and Royd Lloyd, with their Schrift Y the Yourself. Lloyd and Royd's is actually pretty simple. They can both transform into the exact perfect physical likeness of another person. However, their abilities differ slightly. Lloyd takes on that person's power and abilities, while Royd copies their memories and personality, which if you ask me was always really weird, because that literally means that Royd is extraordinarily powerful in and of himself, which I guess is fine. It just always felt a bit weird to me. And finally, with a Schrift known as Deceased in Japanese, we have the last Schrift on this list, being Giselle Jules Zed the Zombie. With a simple splash of her own blood, Giselle can turn Shinigami into corpse puppets that do her bidding. Giselle can't use this power on a living Quincy, however if said Quincy is dead, she is fully able to zombify them. Not only does she turn them into her puppet, but she seemingly has total dominating control over the person as well, and is even able to force them to use their abilities. How much blood is required to zombify someone depends on how much Reiatsu they have. If they're a fairly average Shinigami, they'll only require a single drop of blood. However, for captain class individuals, Giselle needs to get her blood to the Shinigami's heart and diffuse it across their entire body, which is why those Shinigami have reddish skin. There is more to Giselle's Schrift, however, than simply creating an army of zombies. She's actually able to use the zombie to heal her own allies as well. Giselle can graft flesh from other corpses to help rebuild lost limbs, as well as simply reattaching lost limbs entirely. And finally, thanks to her Schrift the Zombie, Giselle is able to endure normally fatal wounds as well, making her practically unkillable. And that's it for my exhaustive and comprehensive breakdown of every single Sternritter Schrift in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. I hope it was useful and helpful to somebody, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite Schrift is in the series, and for fun, what your least favourite one is as well. I think there are a lot of really cool Schrifts in here that allow for some really awesome abilities, but there are also some, I think, that stretch themselves a little bit thin and are extraordinarily vague, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Alright guys, but make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already, give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it to support me and the channel, and if you want to take that support for me another step further, I do also have a Patreon as well, and to everyone supporting me over there, as always, I just want to say an enormous thank you to each and every one of you, and until next time guys, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.